be great if Photoshop was faster and stronger? Well, here I want to highlight a few preferences which we can dial in order to improve Photoshop performance in order to access these preferences. Make your way to the Edit pull-down menu and choose Preferences. And then here, we're going to select Performance. Once you click on that option, you'll notice that we have a few different preferences which we can dial in. Let's start off by talking about RAM, and this is the most important option here. Now, Photoshop loves RAM. The more RAM that you have in your computer, the better Photoshop will run. In other words, whenever you're upgrading your computer, you always want to make sure to upgrade the RAM. And each computer has a certain amount of RAM. And what you can do is allocate RAM to Photoshop or to other applications by default on this particular computer that I'm working on now. Well, it's allocating 70% of the total RAM to Photoshop. The rest is left to other applications. Now, you may want to change this amount based upon your own usage of Photoshop. For example, I have a friend who is a professional retoucher, and when he works in Photoshop, that is all that he's doing. All of his other applications are closed. In his situation, he cranks this way up to 95% so that he's dedicating or allocating all of this RAM to Photoshop. On the other hand, perhaps you are a user who works in Photoshop, also have your web browser open your email client, iTunes, or whatever it is. And if you're going to work in multiple applications, perhaps you want to take this down a bit. Again, how high this goes will determine how well Photoshop will perform. But you have to keep in mind if you're going to work on multiple applications at once, you may need to bring that back a bit. Well, either way, it can't hurt to just nudge that up a little bit more in order to give Photoshop some more RAM because Photoshop loves it and it will perform better. So again, you may want to consider increasing that amount. Next, we have some options for history and cache. Now, these are a little bit awkward. Yet, the one thing I do want to highlight here is, in most situations, the default will work best. We have these three options: web/UI design, default, and huge pixel dimensions. I want to comment on these briefly in case you fall into one of these three categories. Now, what web/UI design is if you have documents which are relatively small in resolution or in file size, but you have a lot of layers. Maybe you're working with web graphics and you have a lot of layers in these lower resolution files. Well, in those cases, you want to choose web/UI design. On the other side of the extreme, perhaps you have really big high-resolution files without a lot of layers. In those situations, you want to choose huge pixel dimensions. Perhaps you're shooting with a digital camera, which is a medium format digital camera. And when you work in Photoshop, you only have 1, 2, or 3 layers. And again, in situations like that, choose this option. Now for the rest of us, for the bulk of us, the default setting will work well. This is where we have these larger files and lots of layers. And in this case, this will optimize the way that Photoshop will perform. All right. Well, next, I simply want to highlight that you almost always want to leave this checkbox turned on, which is to use the graphics processor. This will allow you to take advantage of many features which are in Photoshop. Now, we haven't gotten to those features, but a lot of these features are OpenGL or GPU features, which allow us to see previews more quickly or to do certain things in Photoshop. So again, you almost always want to have this checkbox turned on. And also, if ever you're considering to upgrade your computer, you want to consider having a lot of RAM. You also want to consider having a really strong or good graphics card, as that will help out in a number of different situations when it comes to high performance in Photoshop. All right. Well, in order to apply these preferences, all that we need to do is to simply click OK. And now that we've done that, we've dialed in the most important preferences in Photoshop. Now we're ready to get started to work in Photoshop, and we'll do that in the next chapter. Hey there! Are you loving our Photoshop for Photographers series? Well, we do not want you to miss a thing. Subscribe to our Renderbull channel and turn on those notifications so you never miss a chance to level up your skills. Let's keep learning and growing together.